Hi, my friends, and welcome to Master of Horror, where I give you the scariest paranormal stories that I've ever come by. These are 3 true paranormal stories number 69. Okay, my friends, let's begin.
True paranormal story number 1. The House of Nightmares.
I grew up with my parents separated. I would have to go back and forth between my mom and dad's house. My mom lived in a small town in Texas. It was a 2-story house. My dad was super sick, so my twin brother and I went to go stay with my mother until he recovered. I didn't have a bedroom of my own. My brother Thomas and I had to share a room upstairs with my half-brother Danny. My mom and stepfather stayed in the master bedroom down the hall. Rather than share a room with my brothers, I decided to sleep downstairs on the living room couch. This is where things began to get really scary and creepy. One night during the summer, we got home late. Everyone was getting ready for bed, and I settled down on the couch, and I waited for everyone to go into their rooms so I could finally get some rest. I eventually dozed off. All I remember is I woke up in the middle of the night, and it felt like I was being pulled up from the couch. Panic took over, and I tried to move, but my body was paralyzed as if a heavy weight was on top of my chest. As I struggled in vain, a cold hand covered my mouth, and I couldn't breathe. I felt myself slipping away. Suddenly, the weight lifted, and I shot up off the couch and took a deep, gasping breath. After composing myself, I began to cry until I fell back to sleep. I didn't tell anyone about what happened. For all I knew, it was just a violent nightmare. Now, fast forward a few months later, and there was a really bad storm going on. I was listening to the rain hit the AC unit outside the living room. It was about 2:30 in the morning, and I was beginning to drift off to sleep. From my position on the couch, I could see the kitchen. There was a small sunroom with our washer and dryer next to the back door. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I could see something darting back and forth quickly between the kitchen and the sunroom. It was a dark mass that almost resembled a human, but it had a transparent body. It was quickly pacing between the sunroom and the kitchen. In complete horror and shock, I remember laying there as still as a statue, watching this thing go back and forth. I slowly pulled the covers up to the bridge of my nose, terrified to take my eyes off the figure. A couple of minutes go by, and it just vanishes into thin air. To get to the stairwell from downstairs, you have to go through the kitchen, and even with that thing being gone, I wasn't going to take any chances of trying to go up the stairs and wake up my mom. I ended up pulling the covers completely over my head and fell back to sleep. The next morning, I questioned everyone in the house if they were awake the night before walking around downstairs. My mother just shrugged it off and assumed that I had a really bad nightmare. Not much happened after that. However, my mother ended up passing away, but my father was still sick at the time, so Thomas and I had to stay with my grandmother for the time being. After my mother's funeral, we moved from Texas to Iowa to stay with my aunt. As if the story couldn't get any more tragic, my dad succumbed to his illness and passed away as well. My stepdad was still living in the same house, and we would go see him from time to time. When we would come visit, these strange occurrences began happening all over again. Maybe it was just me, but for some reason, the house seemed darker than ever. It felt like something was constantly watching me. We stayed the night with my stepfather during Christmas vacation. Before my mom passed away, she bought this nice, soft chair. It was very comfortable, and I slept in it the first night back. My brother and stepdad stayed awake playing cards all night. While I was asleep in the chair, I was awoken by Thomas. He kept shaking me, I asked him, "What's the matter?" His eyes were huge, and his face was completely pale. He said, "Rachel, listen. While I was getting ready to sleep, I looked over and I saw your hair. It was floating up in the air as if somebody was holding it and braiding it." After he said this, I quickly felt my hair and I got chills from head to toe. I got off the chair and ran to the other side of the room. I looked in the mirror and half of the front of my hair was braided. I shared the couch with my brother that night, but I still couldn't sleep all night. A couple of weeks later, we went back to visit my stepdad and uncle, and they were cleaning up the front yard. They found one of my old teddy bears buried under some leaves, and they decided to wash it up and give it back to me because the bear was a gift from my mother. She bought it for me many years ago. I was so happy to have it back, even though the buttons didn't work anymore. I would still press the main button multiple times a day, hoping and praying that it would work again. One day, my stepdad Joe took us back to my grandma's house. When we got there, he opened the trunk to grab our bags. That's when the bear activated and began playing its little original tune. The tune started off with its original slow tune. However, as it went on, it became a distorted, drowning sound. It slowed down and then eventually stopped. It was creepy, but I brushed it off thinking that it was just the old damaged wiring. However, the bear would turn on and off for the rest of the night, playing the same drowning tune. Now, what I'm about to tell you, in my opinion, is the most haunting thing that can happen to a human being. During the early morning hours, I was laying in my bed when I was awoken by a crackling voice coming from my teddy bear. To my horror and surprise, it said my name, Rachel. It was on the floor near the feet of my bed. I could not see it. I could only hear it. I waited, hoping that nothing else would happen. That's when I felt something slowly get on my bed. I quickly looked at the spot near my feet, and nothing was there. Yet I could see the imprints of a pair of small, childlike feet. I pulled my legs back. It just stood there at the end of my bed. I balled up and began crying and praying for it to go away. I then felt it leap off the bed, and 3 seconds later, my door opened. I don't know who opened my door. That morning when I got up, I tossed it into the garbage. My stepfather ended up being deported back to Europe, and we never returned to that house again. The house was eventually torn down years later. I was happy to see it go. I really wish I could forget about that haunted house and bury it in the past and move on with my life, but it will forever live on in my nightmares.
True, scary, paranormal story number 2. The aggressive entity.
This happened back in 2007. I was around 9 years old. I had never really experienced anything that can be considered paranormal in my house, but on one lonely night, that would all change. It was around midnight when I happened to wake up as usual. My bedroom door was open with the hallway light turned on. When I turned over and opened my eyes, I saw something. It was a dark, faceless figure looming in the corner of my room. I didn't know what to think or do. Upon seeing this, I was more curious than anything, trying to figure out what it wanted. The tall figure continued to linger around and just stared at me. Looking back, I can honestly say that I wasn't experiencing sleep paralysis. This seemed far too real to even be a dream. I decided to slowly turn around and face the wall. I just covered myself up with a blanket and closed my eyes. The next morning, I decided not to tell my parents about the dark figure. They were extremely religious, and honestly, I didn't want to scare them. After a while, I ended up telling my mom about it. Luckily, she took it pretty well. Instead of flipping out on me, she told me she had also witnessed something similar. But Her encounter was much more disturbing than mine. According to her, a tall dark figure also appeared to her in the middle of the night. She tried to wake up my father, but he remained asleep. Suddenly, the tall dark figure moved in and began to choke her. She began to pray out loud, and the dark figure eventually loosened its grip and backed away. It then disappeared. It was only after that it was gone, and my father woke up. I think the entity also attacked me as well, but in a different way, because ever since I had that encounter, scary things have happened to me over the years. I am now 23 years old, and I still live in that same haunted hell house. Thankfully, I have never experienced anything like that ever since, and I can only speculate as to what the dark, tall figure was and what its intentions really were.
True, scary, paranormal story number 3. The new house.
I'll start off by saying that I don't live with my family. I'm currently renting a house a half a mile away from them. My mom and my brother live in a subdivision, and my dad is currently working abroad. My brother has a mental disorder, which can make him unpredictable sometimes, and he's still in high school, which also further complicates things. Last year, when my family moved into that house, my mother began experiencing unnatural paranormal things. Before she moved in, she decided to visit and clean up the house with 2 of her acquaintances. While they were there cleaning up, they found these weird red triangle pentagrams under the rugs. At first, they forgot about it, but my mother suspected that something wasn't quite right. When the pentagrams were removed, she had this inexplicable feeling that they were making a huge mistake. At that exact moment, when they were removed, the ceiling fans began to turn on and off by themselves. One of my mother's friends was an experienced painter, and he was left alone to paint the walls while my mom went for a food run. When she got back, she knocked on the door, but no one answered. She then texted him to let him know that she was outside waiting. Suddenly, she received a reply from him that just said, "You need to wait." My mom was taken back by the rude and abrupt message, but she figured that he may have been in the bathroom or something. After a couple of minutes, she knocked on the door again, and her friend eventually opened the door. When it came time to leave, she casually asked her friend if he didn't hear her when she was knocking on the door earlier. She also mentioned the text message that he had sent her. But the scariest part was he said he never sent a text message at all, and that he couldn't even hear her knocking because the music was blasting from his phone. This gave my mother the creeps. The next encounter happened right after the house was done being remodeled. My mother brought an acquaintance to help her clean up the house. They couldn't get the front door to open. They both pushed on the door as hard as they could when suddenly there came 3 knocks from the other side, and the door slowly opened by itself. They then searched the entire house, but no one was there. We found out from some neighbors that the family who lived there before didn't stay there very long either, because of a series of bizarre and unexplainable occurrences. After my mom and brother moved in, the supernatural events just worsened. There has been numerous attempts to deal with these restless spirits in the house, even inviting some local pastors over to bless the home. I was and am still worried about my brother. Whatever resides in that house has seemed to take a special interest in him, and he can hear his name being called out, beckoning to him. The other things that they have been experiencing are lights flickering on their own. Uncontrollable random knocking can be heard on the roof, and scratch marks have appeared on the walls. My mother has reached out to random people that can help, but nothing seems to work. She has now reached her breaking point and plans on moving out of that hell house. I just hope it's not too late for them. Their departure may trigger whatever's targeting my brother. It might just stop toying around with him and finally make its move.